Berlin, Saturday, March the 16th, 1918. Amid the cheers of thousands, led by several music corps and escorted by an honor company of the army, the crew of the auxiliary cruiser Wolf marched in a true triumphal procession through the Brandenburg Gate, further along Unter den Linden, where they were welcomed by Mayor Dr. Reske with a patriotic speech. Their ship had returned to the naval port of Kiel on February 24th, after the longest enemy voyage of a German auxiliary cruiser in the First World War. In a unique achievement in German naval warfare history, the auxiliary cruiser Wolf, over 451 days in a distance roughly equal to 2.5 times the circumference of the Earth, conducted a successful campaign of mine-laying and commerce raiding in the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Pacific, all without any support from home. This resulted in the total loss or severe damage of 35 merchant ships and 2 warships for her opponents, with a total of approximately 110,000 gross register tons. Commander of this extraordinary ship was Karl August Nerger, born on the 25th of February 1875 in Rostock, eldest son of the linguist Dr. Karl Friedrich Ludwig Nerger and his wife Clara. His 2 younger brothers, who were both trained as doctors, also made careers in the Imperial Navy. Bruno, 3 years younger, as a senior medical officer, and the youngest, Hans, as a chief medical officer. Karl August Nerger entered the Imperial Navy as a cadet on the 4th of April 1893, was promoted to midshipman on the 8th of September 1894, and to sub-lieutenant at sea on the 14th of September 1896. The aforementioned ranks of cadet, midshipman, and sub-lieutenant at sea were replaced 3 years later, in 1899, by the new ranks: cadet equal to midshipman, midshipman equal to ensign at sea, and sub-lieutenant at sea equal to lieutenant at sea. For this purpose, the former rank of lieutenant at sea was now elevated to senior lieutenant at sea, to which Nerger was promoted on the 9th of September 1900. During this time, he was the watch officer on the gunboat Iltis, which was deployed in China during the so-called Boxer Rebellion that lasted from October 18, 1899 to September 7, 1901. This uprising of the Yihetuan movement, who because of their martial arts training were referred to in the West as Boxers, was directed against the growing foreign Christian influence in China. The result was a war between Chinese nationalist forces and, from left to right, the Western great powers: Italy, the United States of America, France, Austria, Hungary, Japan, the German Empire, the United Kingdom, and the Russian Empire, with a total of 54 warships, 4,900 Marines, and at least 51,000 Army troops. Germany participated with 5 warships, 600 men from the Naval Battalion, that is, Marines, and around 300 Army soldiers. Here once again are soldiers from various contingents from left: United Kingdom, United States of America, British Australia, British India, German Empire, France, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and Japan. The Russian soldier is missing in this picture. During the Boxer Rebellion, the gunboat Iltis was also involved on the 17th of June 1900, with its guns in the suppression and capture of the Taku forts, which were stubbornly defended by the Chinese. In the process, Iltis sustained 21 hits, with 8 crew members killed. Senior Lieutenant at sea Hans Hellmann, gunsmith's mate Ludwig Bestlein, leading seamen Max Zokopf, Johannes Maas, and Felix Botha, seamen Peter Leinhoff, and stokers Hans Holm and Emil Vane. He succumbed to his injuries on June 22. Another 11 had been wounded. The commander of the Iltis, Red Dot, Corvette Captain Wilhelm Lantz, from 1913 referred to as von Lantz, who was severely wounded during the battle by the shattering of his left lower leg. The drawing shows him to the right, next to the one who fell shortly afterwards, the senior lieutenant. Hellman, who was awarded the Prussian Palm Merit on June 25, 1900. But his gunboat also received a remarkable honor. As the only ship in the German Navy, Iltis was awarded the Palm Merit by the highest cabinet order on January 27, 1903. Since then, it was allowed to display a replica of this order on the flagstaff of the Jack and on both gunwales of the ship's boats. Around 1902, Nerger married Marie, née Friedrichsen, who was 11 years younger. With her, he had 3 sons and 2 daughters. From 1904, Karl August Nerger attended the Naval Academy in Kiel for 2 years, and on the 21st of March, 1905 was promoted to lieutenant captain, equivalent to captain. After that, he was commander of the Naval Reserve Division in Cuxhaven between the 14th of August and the 15th of September, 1906, at the same time also head of the 1st Minesweeping Division. From the 1st of October, 1909, he then served as navigation officer, first on the battleship His Majesty's ship Hanover, and from the 16th of September, 1910. On the battleship His Majesty's ship Westfalen. On the 10th of April, 1911, he was promoted to corvette captain, equivalent to major, and was assigned from the 1st of October in the General Naval Department at the Imperial Naval Office at Leipziger Platz 13 in Berlin, in the Division for Military Matters of Ship Construction, Weapons Training, and Tactics. Thus solidly and broadly trained, 1 month before the outbreak of the First World War, on the 1st of August 1914, he took command of the light cruiser His Majesty's ship Stettin, which from July until March 1916 he commanded. The ship was involved on the 28th of August 1914 in the naval battle off Heligoland, when he, together with the light cruiser Frauenlob, had been sent in the early morning to support the German torpedo boats that were under heavy attack. In the process, His Majesty's ship Stettin engaged the British cruiser Fearless, receiving several hits, with 2 soldiers killed and 9 wounded. In this battle in the German Bight, the vastly superior British forces, with their 5 battle cruisers, 8 light cruisers, 33 destroyers, and 8 submarines, against 6 German light cruisers and 19 torpedo boats, succeeded in sinking the following 3 German light cruisers and 1 boat. In the process, 712 German sailors were killed, compared to a loss of 35 on the side of the Royal Navy. The Mainz, with 91 fallen sailors, among them the commander, captain at sea Wilhelm Paschen, and the ship's doctor, the Ariadne and captain at sea Hans Seebohm, with 64 fallen, and the Cone and frigate captain Hans Meidinger. Of their 506 crew members, all but 1 stoker were killed. Additionally, the 51-year-old Rear Admiral Liebrecht Maas, who had used the Cone as his flagship during the naval battle, as well as the torpedo boat V-187 with 24 fallen. On April 1st, 1916, Nerger was appointed commander of the auxiliary cruiser Wolf, and on January 13th, 1917, he was promoted to frigate captain, equivalent to lieutenant colonel. After the return of the Wolf in February 1918, he was, from June 10th until the end of the war in November, commander of the patrol boats in the North Sea. Then, on July 25th, 1919, he left the service with the rank of captain at sea, equivalent to colonel, from the Reichsmarine of the Weimar Republic, which was limited to only 15,000 soldiers due to the Treaty of Versailles. Previously, on February 28, 1918, he had been awarded honorary citizenship at the Town Hall of Rostock, and in 1919 he received the honorary title of Doctor of Medicine from the University of Rostock. After a highly successful civilian career, including at the Berlin Siemens Schuckert Works, the now 64-year-old Nerger was awarded the rank of Rear Admiral on August 19, 1939. However, he was no longer used in a military capacity. On August 15, 1943, 3 months after the surrender of the Wehrmacht, the now 70-year-old was arrested and taken away from his Potsdam home by a Soviet commando as an alleged member of the German military intelligence service Abwehr to the so-called Special Camp No. 7, which had been set up by the Soviets on the grounds of the former Sachsenhausen concentration camp. 4 weeks after his arrest, his wife Marie died at the age of 59 under unexplained circumstances. 1.5 years after her death, Nerger also died in the Soviet Special Camp, No. 7, on January 12, 1947. While the official cause of death was listed as severe emaciation, in the 1999 book The Wolf, by the Australian Peter Honan and the Englishman Richard Gilead, it is written, based on the testimony of a former fellow inmate named Heinz Massach, that in reality the then 71-year-old Nerger was beaten to death by the inmate Wilhelm Wagner, who was extorting protection money in the camp. In 1967, he was found not guilty due to lack of evidence in a trial for the crime he denied, but was sentenced to 5 years in prison for other assaults on inmates. In Soviet Special Camp No. 7, the man who died alongside retired captain at sea, Karl August Nerger, was the one who, with his auxiliary cruiser, went down in naval warfare history as the most successful commerce raider of all time. His Wolf was actually not a real warship, but rather the Wachtfels, a cargo ship built in 1913 by the Flensburg Shipbuilding Company. A single-screw ship with a displacement of 5,809 tons and a maximum speed of 10.5 knots. It was only at the outbreak of war in 1914 that it was converted into an armed merchant ship, then had a crew of 348 men, and was armed with 7 15-centimeter rapid-fire guns, 3 5.2-centimeter quick-loading guns, and 4 50-centimeter torpedo tubes. In addition, there were 465 mines that had been brought in by rail transport. As a special feature, Wolf had a Friedrichshafen FF-33 seaplane on board, which was nicknamed Wölfchen and was piloted by the Reserve Deputy Flight Master Alexander Stein, seen here on the left after their return in February 1918, who was promoted to Reserve Lieutenant, and by Navy Senior Flight Master Paul Fabeck. Wölfchen was the first aircraft to be used from a warship on the high seas. Here, Lieutenant Stein is standing on the aircraft, and Fabeck is sitting in the front. On the 30th of November, 1916, the auxiliary cruiser Wolf put to sea under the worst weather conditions, which, though unpleasant for the crew, were also helpful in breaking through the blockade of the Royal Navy. Nerger's mission, laying mines off the coasts of South Africa, India, and Singapore. After that, the Wolf was supposed to conduct commerce raiding on her way back home. After the Wolf had reached the South Atlantic on the 10th of December, 1916, unnoticed by the Royal Navy, she laid her first minefield on the night of the 16th to the 17th of January, 1917, red dots. Off Dasson Island in South Africa, days later, off Cape Agulhas, the area between the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, and then 2 more off Bombay and Colombo. By February 21, 1917, 5 British steamers had already fallen victim to these minefields. Off Cape Town, the Mathurin and the Cecilia. Off Cape Agulhas, the Tindareus. Off Colombo, the Hoostesher and the Perseus. After completing her mine-laying mission in these waters, Wolf began her second mission, commerce raiding, on February 19th. On February 27, 1917, the first ship, the British steamer Turritella, was captured in the Indian Ocean. Curiously, this ship was a sister ship of the Wolf, the former Gutenfels II. Here is her identical sister ship Stolzenfels, which had been seized by the British in Port Said at the beginning of the war. But now, out of nostalgia for his time during the Boxer Rebellion on the gunboat Iltis, it was converted into the auxiliary cruiser Iltis. Under the command of the first officer of the Wolf, Lieutenant Commander Ivan Brandes, it was sent out with a crew of 25 men, a 10.5-centimeter gun, and 25 mines. However, on the night of March 5th, Iltis was intercepted near Aden by the British sloop His Majesty's ship Odin, a so-called sloop. Here is the sister ship of the Odin, the Clio. Since Carlo Brandeis saw no chance of escape, he scuttled his ship himself and, together with his crew, went into British captivity in the Indian internment camp at Ahmednagar. They were not released from there until over 3 years later, in April 1920, when they were sent back to Germany. When capturing the Turritina, formerly Gutenfels, a particular incident occurred when some crew members took possession of foreign property from the cabins. When Nerger found out about this and secured the items, he instructed his crew that looting during war would be punished by death. On March 1st, 1917, the British steamer Jumna was sunk. After that, the auxiliary cruiser Wolf proceeded to New Zealand, where on the 11th of March, the Wordsworth, and on the 30th of March in the south, the Barcadie from Mauritius fell victim to her. However, during the following weeks in the waters around New Zealand, they were unable to spot any enemy ships, which Nerger had taken advantage of. On May 22nd, his ship, which had been at sea for 4 months, anchored on the remote southeastern side of Rowell Island, about 1,000 kilometers north of New Zealand, to carry out the necessary maintenance work on the machinery there. After that, on the 2nd of June 1917, the Wolf seized the New Zealand steamer Wairuna. Its cargo consisted of tallow, wax, rubber, hides, pelts, and 42 live sheep. The existing cargo, worth £1.2 million, was transferred over the next 2 weeks, and on June 17th it was sunk near the Rowell Islands. One day after the sinking of the captured American 4-masted schooner Winslow, whose cargo, which included coal and barrels of gasoline, had also been transferred. Then, on the 22nd of June, the voyage of the Wolf continued towards Australia, at Cape Maria Van Diemen on the northern coast of New Zealand. Green dots marked where 25 mines had been dropped, 35 in the Cook Strait and 30 in the Bass Strait. Wolf then turned northeast and sailed through the Solomon Islands towards Singapore, where on July 9th she captured and sank the American barque Beluga, which was operating as an ocean freighter. When the captured second officer of the Beluga, Johnson, died from his wounds, the crew of the Wolf gave him a military burial. On the 15th of July, another American bark, the Encore, was sunk. When at the beginning of August, a radio message was intercepted about the approach of the Australian steamer Matunga, light blue, she was sighted on the 6th of August by the Wolf's seaplane Wilfchen and then seized. In addition to numerous prisoners, around 800 tons of coal had also been taken as further prize. Hundreds of cases of beer, as well as wine, whiskey, 3.5 tons of frozen meat, along with cigarettes, tobacco, biscuits, chocolate, vegetables, and fruit. The prize was commanded by Lieutenant at Sea of the Reserve, Karl Rose, who had basically become Nerger's representative after the capture of Ivan Brandes, then went together with the Wolf to Waigeo Island. Yellow Point was unloaded and scuttled there. Then on the 4th and 5th of September 1917, when the remaining 110 mines, red dots, had been laid off Singapore, the Wolf, setting course across the Indian Ocean, began her return voyage, now shown in green. During the next 8 weeks marked with red-yellow points, they were able to either sink or capture 5 more ships. The Japanese steamer Hitachi Maru, during whose resistance 14 Japanese were killed, and whose captain Tominaga, after the surrender of his ship, committed suicide as a prisoner on board the Wolf before his ship was sunk. The American bark John H. Kirby, the French bark Maréchal Davout, and the Norwegian four-masted bark Storebror. The Spanish steamer Egots Mendy, captured on the 10th of November 1917, which despite Spain's neutrality was about to bring 5,000 tons of coal to England, then at war with Germany, provided with its cargo for the Wolf's return voyage. This ship too was to be taken as a prize to Germany by Reserve Lieutenant Rose, shown here with binoculars. But then he accidentally ran aground on a beach in Denmark and, along with his crew, was held in captivity until the end of the war. In general, during the 451 days of the voyage, the necessary fuel, food, and other materials were repeatedly taken from the captured prizes, like here from the Japanese ship Hitachi Maru. In this context, as a German journalist wrote years ago in a newspaper article, after the capture of the enemy ships, the more than 430 prisoners taken, including soldiers, women, and children, emphasized the chivalrous treatment they received. However, according to the journalist, the class differences of the empire between officers and sailors were reflected in condescending treatment and poor food, which would have led to a deep rift. The journalist's source for this was the novel Des Kaisers Kulis, published in 1930. The novel had been written by Theodore Plivier, a communist and anarchist who had served on the Wolf as a senior stoker, that is, leading seaman, equivalent to private first class, and who in November 1918 also took an active part in the naval mutiny and revolt, and who had not called his book, written from the perspective of a stoker working in the belly of a ship, a novel for nothing. It is probably true that the distance between a naval officer on a warship and a stoker was greater than, for example, the relationship between an infantry lieutenant in the trenches and a private serving as a machine gunner. And furthermore, it can also be assumed that on a war patrol lasting 451 days and nights, interrupted only by a few shore leaves on remote islands, a certain testosterone-driven nervousness could break out among one or another of the 348 men, perhaps with verbal acts of indiscipline. But it is also certain that a warship left to itself for 451 days on all the seas could not have been so successful if there had really been a deep rift between the ranks. Especially since the sailors were not timid recruits, but tough and experienced seamen, often over 30 years old. And many were also reservists, as was a significant number of officers, boatswains, and mates. And it's also understandable that on a warship in active service, with all its peculiarities of cramped space and the inability to avoid each other, things can be difficult. There must be consistent formal discipline so that a too relaxed interaction with each other doesn't eventually lead to problems when carrying out an order or command. The answer comes, you can get lost, as has apparently happened before, after company outings filled with alcohol and the famous morning after. Since the commander-in-chief of the Baltic Sea Forces, who was stationed at Kiel Castle, had not received any news from the auxiliary cruiser since October 1917, they had already assumed it was lost. But the reason for Nerger's radio silence was simply that since the last sinking of the Norwegian Storebror on the 4th of January, the Wolf had already been on her way home, and, because of the threat from submarines, both British and her own, wanted to conceal her position. On the 27th of January 1918, the 59th birthday of Kaiser Wilhelm II, the ship ran into a severe winter storm and, in the heaviest seas, took on a great deal of water. Only the almost superhuman efforts of the crew and a lot of luck had prevented the ship from being lost. But then, Nerger, who was also known as a navigation genius, managed to break through the British North Sea blockade without up-to-date nautical charts showing the German and English minefields marked in red, reaching the coast of Norway on February 14th and the Baltic Sea on the 17th. However, the ship was held up near Flensburg for another week, so that preparations could be made for a proper official reception. After Wolfe then entered her home, port of Kiel, and the crew had come ashore, they were first welcomed by the port governor, Admiral Gustav Bachmann. Then they continued on to the imperial capital, Berlin, where, as described at the beginning, on March 16, 1918, they marched through the Brandenburg Gate to the cheers of the enthusiastic crowd. For his unique achievement of having achieved the greatest possible success without any support or connection, Frigate Captain Nerger, who already held both Iron Crosses, was also awarded the highest Prussian war order, the Pour le Mérite, upon his return on February 24th. On the 25th, he received the Knight's Cross of the Military Order of St. Henry, and on March 28th, the Knight's Cross of the Royal Bavarian Military Max Joseph Order, which would have made him Knight von Nerger if he had been a Bavarian citizen. His already written book, SMS Wolf, was a bestseller. The entire crew had been awarded the Iron Cross Second Class, and some had also received the First Class. During the 451 days at sea, they had sunk a total of 14 ships with their torpedoes, mines, attached charges, or naval artillery amounting to 38,391 gross register tons. Another 13 ships, totaling 75,888 gross register tons, had fallen victim to the minefields. In addition, they had also captured significant amounts of war-essential materials, such as rubber, copper, zinc, or brass, worth around 40 million Reichsmarks, had severely disrupted Allied shipping, and had tied up a considerable number of Allied warships that had spent 15 months searching in vain for the German auxiliary cruiser. This fact, and that Nerger was able to keep his ship running under steam for 15 months unnoticed and without entering a port, was a maritime achievement much discussed and repeatedly praised in international naval circles. This ensured that Frigate Captain Nerger and the crew of the auxiliary cruiser, Wolf of the Imperial German Navy, would not only remain unforgettable in German naval war history,